my day job now is as executive founder of Wellville, which is a 10-year, 5-community nonprofit project. And each of those words is carefully picked. We don't want to scale or grow forever. We want to spend 10 years and show what a difference just a little bit of coaching and within communities, long-term thinking and thinking about equity and health, the kind of difference you can make. These communities are small, they're across the US, there's 5 of them, and I am learning so much. It's an amazingly fun thing to do. And beyond that, I'm an angel investor. I trained as a cosmonaut backup. Yeah. I was a journalist. I studied economics. So I bring to investing into the work I'm doing a whole range of backgrounds, including a real respect for the truth and the ability to ask questions without being scared of looking stupid.
Well, I was the editor-in-chief of my college newspaper and law school newspaper, and I definitely, that helped me understand there are 12 sides to a story.
Yes.
Well, if you could, speaking of alumni, just share your alumni connections, because that's important to our community.
You mean I went to Harvard or?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's it. My education has all been on the job since then, and other than the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. But really, the best way to learn something is go out and do a job or join a board or go to a country. And so I've spent my life doing that.
But that cosmonaut experience is to us like a foxhole. You have a shared experience. Whoever went through that, it's a small group.
Yes.
Well, and now as you look back on 2020, your best and worst decisions, what do you think?
Well, I've rarely make decisions. I discover them, and you don't really know. I mean, whatever I did right or wrong in 2020, I won't know for years. But what I did not do is sell all my stocks back in March, April, which is really great because now I still have a lot of Square, which is funding Wellville. So, never act too hastily. And again, I try not to make decisions. I just discover things that are inevitable.
Interesting. And then, so with that segueing to, as you go forward, how do you wish to discover, or how should we think about what we're going to discover in 2021?
Well, so I can talk about Wellville all day long, but if you want investment advice, I think one of the things that's beginning to look really interesting is what I call counterfactuals. And that is in some form insurance, but not insurance that spreads risk, rather insurance that reduces risk and shares in the benefits. So, I mean, this is what we're slowly starting to do with Medicare Advantage. It's what we did 100 years ago with fire insurance. It wasn't simply, if you have a fire, we'll pay you the damages. It was, before we give you the insurance, we're going to come and inspect your building. We're going to look for oily rags. We're going to, and, the more, what big data tells us is not just what's going to happen, but it can also tell us what would have happened so we can compare it to what did happen and reap those benefits. And I think, we're such a short-term society. We want immediate returns, whether it's, I want to take a drug and feel better, or I want to have a grant to do something, but it's short-term, as opposed to building institutions and, given what I do, investing in health rather than spending on health care later on. Why don't we make our cars safer, which we've started to do, rather than, run a chain of repair shops. And I see this happening. So I read the news in a somewhat different way. For example, these churches and synagogues that want to hold religious services with people with no masks, fine. But why don't you pay the healthcare costs of anybody who gets sick in your institution? And then go try and find insurance. And the insurance companies, maybe they'll come in and they'll make sure you follow safety protocols, or maybe they simply won't insure you, or they'll charge too much. And it's a way of, I'm not sure I want the government regulating everything, but I'd love to have a lot more insurance and a lot more liability that would then make people understand the cost of their short-term behavior.
So it's a tough one to keep in. That has lots of nuances, and so it sounds like
Yes.
it deserves its own deep dive, as we call them. So I think of you in social development goals, you're sort of living, what you talk about, and your businesses are intertwined. But how do you think of the SDGs that you're focused on today?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, what we're trying to do is to get our communities to think both long-term and about poor people, people of different races, the entire community, not just their little subset, and to show that there are actually long-term benefits. I mean, even as a business model, it's much cheaper to keep people healthy than to pay for them to be sick. If you're an employer, you want healthy employees. If you're selling something, you want healthy customers. And you don't want medical care costs or insurance costs or the costs of pollution eating up the economy you live in. And because you're the rich person, you have to pay taxes for this stuff. So, it's more about getting people to think long term than it is trying to get them to be generous. I mean, ideally they would be, but I'm happy to make the economic and financial argument. Personally, I also would make the moral and just justice argument. So
Does this on this point, does it tie into other organizations or the UN SDGs, or is it your own sort of initiative?
I mean, we certainly aren't working with the UN or anything. We are working with local, the YMCA, Goodwill, Walmart. We're working with institutions that have the ability to scale what we're doing in our places to much more broadly. Because what we want to show is when you try to make change, you can, it's density rather than scale that matters, because people change because of their neighbors. They don't change because of somebody in another community. If 1% of the country does something, it's not noticeable. But if 1% of the country does that collected in 2 or 3 small places, it makes a huge impact. And then you see the impact and then it spreads. So what we're trying to do, around the time I started Wellville, there was a huge scandal. Somebody had peed into a reservoir. This was in Washington State. And they emptied half the reservoir or something. And it's like, what do you think birds do in this reservoir all the time? Plus people who aren't on video. And nobody, it has no impact on the reservoir. So what we wanted to do, by contrast, was to pour rose water into a bathtub and show the impact that could have. So we've got these 5 bathtubs where we're helping people to build their own rose water. We're not doing it for them. We're coaching them as they develop their own long-term institutions around maternal and child care, mental health, education, the things that are what I call public infrastructure.
Well, I have 10 more questions, but let me go on to the asks. Given all that, how can we help you, Esther?
Well, if anybody's interested in the things I mentioned and would like to invest in not just projects, but in building long-term institutions in these 5 communities, God bless you, come visit. If you want to do it in your own community and you want advice or just to see what someone else is doing, happy to talk to you. Because this is what's really going to make us healthy in the long run. It's investing long-term in the future, not simply building better hospitals.
And I guess you probably hit on this already, but just advice and then a final word or choice you might have for 2021.
Advice is think long-term and think broadly. And it's 2 words, but it's next chapter.